come this week to the best chapter in the book of Esther, certainly the most dramatic, the most memorable, the most often quoted. And the application we're going to look at today is what to expect when you follow God, and it's probably not what you are expecting. What to expect to happen when you follow God, and it's probably not what you are expecting. Let's go back and review chapter 1. Do you remember what we said is in chapter 1? I called it Vashti Gets the Flick. Vashti Gets the Flick. In chapter 2, do you remember what's in chapter 2? I call that Esther Gets the Pick. Esther Gets the Pick. And number 3, Haman Makes a Plan. And chapter 4, Esther takes a stand. Now, technically speaking, she didn't actually take the stand in a way until a couple of more chapters. But she prepares to take a stand in this chapter, and we're going to look at that today. Esther 4, beginning in verse 1, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Swindoll, in his book on Esther, talks about the fact that different cultures express grief in different ways, and some somewhat subtly, but in this culture they express grief in a very overt, very loud kind of way. And you see that in some of the phrases that are used in the next couple of verses. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. And you see this great distress that is on Esther and Mordecai and on all the people of Israel. Skipping down to verse 12, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do you think that because you are in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will escape? For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And we just pause there and we say that we learn something about the providence of God. You study the theologians these days, and I'm reading some books around this is kind of on my mind, but the theologians actually differ a little bit as to exactly the nature of God's providence. And some will lean into kind of a deterministic, God controls every little detail kind of thing, and some almost lean toward a deistic approach where God started the world spinning like a top and stepped back. And I think a midpoint is probably a better idea, and I like to think of it this way. It's like my father-in-law when he takes his dog. I went out for a walk with my father-in-law the other day, and he lives out in the country. He took his dog on a walk with a long rope. In fact, I asked him, I said, how long is that rope? He said, it's about 50 feet. And he put his dog on a 50-foot long leash. And he took his dog for a walk down toward the river near where he lives. And the truth is that dog could go off here, and it could go off here, and it could go forward, it could go back, it could go around in circles, it could go around a tree, it could go wherever it wants. But eventually that dog was going to end up where he was going to end up, and that was toward the river, not actually to the river, but toward the river. And so it is with the providence of God, that it seems to me that he allows a lot of things to go on, and he manages planet Earth with a pretty long leash. But he is going to get his way in the long run. Another analogy of this, you might think about your kids when they were young, and you put them in the van, and in the van they could do all kinds of things in the van. They could color in a coloring book, or maybe they could watch a show on their iPad or whatever they might choose to do, but they're in the van and they're going to go where the van is going. And Mordecai says to his niece here, if you remain silent this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise. God is going to get his way. God is going to protect his people. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows? And I draw your attention to those two words, who knows? That's going to be the key words of our verse today. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights. In other words, what she is saying is the situation is desperate. It calls for prayer. The situation is desperate. It calls for prayer. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if, I draw your attention to that word, if I perish, I perish. And she didn't perish. But I draw your attention to that word if, because it reminds us